Hi guys, this is Tekken57. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial showing you how to create animations for mods that you create for the WWE SmackDown series of games for the PC version. I'm going to be showing you a method today which allows you to copy the animations from the original model which you created your mod from, and this will prevent you from having to manually create each of the animations for your model. So for this example, I'm going to be utilizing my Scott Steiner mod, which I'm currently utilizing. It's currently loaded in X-Ray. For this model, I used the DDP model as a base to create my mod from. Alright, so I've already opened the Scott Steiner mod in X-Ray, and if you take a look at the animations which are loaded in the model, you'll see that the model doesn't have any animations created. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the model using the File, Open Y-Object New Format or Control N option. Once the model is loaded, I'm going to load Object 1. I'm going to export this, and I'm going to call it Object 0, which is the default name. Now I'm going to open up the DDP model, which is the original model which I used to create my mod on, and I'm also going to export Object 0 from here. So I'm going to export it, and I'm going to call it Object 0 DDP, just so that I don't get confused between the object I just exported from the mod I've created, Scott Steiner. Alright, so now I have two objects which I created, and I can export this into Mudbox. However, if you import these models directly into Mudbox after exporting from X-Ray, you'll find that Mudbox creates an issue with the way the faces are unwrapped. So if I import DDP's model, for instance, you'll notice that there's an issue with the model here. You'll see that there's vertices which are placed in some weird place. So in order to prevent this error from occurring, I'm going to import the model into 3D Studio Max and then export it again. So in order to prevent this error from occurring, I'm going to import this model into 3D Studio Max and then export it again before doing an import in the Mudbox. So I've imported the DDP model into 3D Studio Max. I'm going to export and override the file we've just created, which is the object0.ddp file. When exporting the file, ensure that you have the correct options which you use to import into X-Ray, which is as displayed on the screen. None of the optimized options should be selected. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing for the Object 0 for the Steiner head which I've created. So let's import this and then export and override the file we've just imported. Alright, so if I import the files now into Mudbox, you'll find that they are imported without any issues. So firstly, import object0.ddp. Alright, you'll notice that the file is now being imported without any errors. Alright, so select object0.ddp and go into the Layers tab. Once you're here, select Sculpt Layer and now select New Group. Now this step is very important because we are going to send the Sculpt Layers from Mudbox to 3D Studio Max, and if you do not create a group first before importing your Sculpt Layers, you'll find that none of the objects are transferred across to 3D Studio Max. Alright, so the Sculpt Layers work by applying changes to the model, and it allows you to create multiple sculpt changes to the model as different layers, and then these layers can be sent to 3D Studio Max as morph targets. Now if you're unsure about what morph targets are or how Sculpt Layers work in Mudbox, you can refer to any of the previous tutorials I've done, and it'll give you more information on this. I'm not going to go into too much of detail of this in this tutorial. Alright, but this quickly, if I open the DDP model and I open one of the animations, so let's maybe animation 45 for instance, And if I export this animation 45 and I import this as a sculpt layer into Mudbox like so, you'll find that it has an animation of mouth open. If I deselect this, the mouth closes. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and trick the sculpt layers into applying the animation of the mouth open to our mod which we've just created. So if I import the Scott Steiner head as a sculpt layer, you'll find that the DDP model now changes into Scott Steiner. If I turn this off, it morphs back into DDP. Okay, this layer needs to be our first layer, and importantly, this layer needs to be named Object 0. So now if I turn on animation 45, it will apply the sculpt changes which were done to the DDP model, but it will apply it to the Scott Steiner mesh which we've just imported. So I'm going to do this, and you can see the mouth has now opened. Okay, I'm just going to delete animation 45 because I'm going to import all of the animated meshes in one go. So let's delete this. Alright, so to recap, we have DDP model which we've imported. We created a group, and in the group we've imported the modded head which we've created, which is Scott Steiner's head in this instance. Now I'm going to import all of the animated meshes which are from the DDP model, and we can apply these to the Scott Steiner head which we've just created. Now, as I've described, when importing the DDP head, Mudbox creates an error when you import meshes which were exported directly from X-Ray. So we need to import the animated meshes into 3D Studio Max first, and then thereafter export it from 3D Studio Max and import it back into Mudbox. Alright, so let's open up the DDP Y object file using the Control A option in X-Ray, and this will load all of the animated meshes for us. So from here we want to export all of these meshes, so I'm going to hit export all, right, and I'm going to export this into a folder called extract. Alright, all the objects have been exported to a folder called extract. Now we need to import these animated meshes into 3D Studio Max, and then we need to export this back out of 3D Studio Max before we can import into Mudbox. So if I go into 3D Studio Max, I'm going to hit Control New to clear the scene. Okay, so now you can import each of the animated meshes one by one into 3D Studio Max, or you can utilize a batch import export script, which I'm going to link in the description below. Okay, I've just created a shortcut button to do the batch import, so I'm going to hit that button, and this script works by selecting the files that you want to import, and then thereafter it'll import all the files in one go into 3D Studio Max. So I'm just going to browse for the files we've created in the folder which I've named extract. Alright, once I am in the folder called extract, you need to change the selection to object files, and you will see all the animated meshes which we've just exported from the DDP model. Okay, I'm going to select all of these meshes, and I'm going to say open, and I'm going to select the option that says all at the bottom. Ensure that none of the checkboxes are checked except for the import options checkbox, and then thereafter you hit all. Okay, this will give you the standard object imports dialog box, and ensure that your options are as displayed on the screen at the moment, which is usually the default options. I'm going to click on import. Then this script will begin importing all of the animated meshes for us. Alright, now that all of the animated meshes have been imported into 3D Studio Max, we can export these. So I'm going to select a location to extract these, which is my extract folder. I created a subfolder called Max so that I don't get confused. I'm going to select the all button again, and ensure that you do not have any of the options selected except for export options, and also ensure that your format is selected as object. Okay, I'm going to click the all button and I'm going to wait for the script to execute. Alright, while the script is running, I'm going to go into Mudbox and I'm going to create a new scene. I'm going to import object 0 DDP. I'm going to create a new group. Doesn't matter what you name the group as long as you have a group. I'm going to right click on group and I'm going to import the Sculpt Layers head which we exported. Alright, so now I have object 0 DDP and I have the Sculpt Layers head loaded in. Now all we need to do here is import the animated meshes which were created from 3D Studio Max with the bulk export script. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to say import layer and I'm going to select all of the animated meshes which we selected. Alright, I'm now in the folder which was where all the animated meshes were exported from 3D Studio Max, and I'm going to select all of the meshes except for animation 0. The reason why I'm not selecting animation 0 is because this is the same mesh as the DDP head which was exported from object 0, which is the default pose for the head. I'm going to select open, leave it on the default options and click OK, and you'll find that Mudbox will now start importing all of the animated meshes from the DDP model into our scene. Now that all of the animated meshes have been imported into your scene, you'll find that the model looks very corrupted. So you have a couple of options here in which you can export all of the animated meshes. The first is you can turn off all of the sculpt layers one by one, and you can turn on each sculpt layer and export each animated mesh separately. But as you can see, there are 112 animated meshes, so this process will take you some time to do. The second option is we can now send this mesh to 3D Studio Max and we can utilize a script to turn off all the sculpt layers, turn on each sculpt layer one by one, and then export each animated mesh separately. I've coded a script to do this for you, and I'm posting a link to the script in the description below. Alright, so it's important to note here that you must have the same versions of 3D Studio Max and Mudbox in order to send meshes between the programs. So for example, I am using Mudbox 2017, so I must have 3D Studio Max 2017 installed. Likewise, if you have Mudbox 2016, you need to have 3D Studio Max 2016 installed. Alright, so I'm going to hit the file, send to 3D Studio Max option. Now before I do that, ensure that your preferences are set as follows. Firstly, under paint layers, send paint layers separately, and then secondly, if there are sculpt layers, export sculpt layer groups on current mesh as morph targets. This is very important to select, because if you do not select the sculpt layers to be sent as morph targets, you will not be able to export each of the animated meshes separately. Alright, so once you are certain that your preferences are correct, select your object and click on the file, send to 3D Studio Max, send selected as new scene option. Okay, Mudbox has now sent the object back to 3D Studio Max. So with the object selected, go to the Modify tab and ensure that there is a morph modifier listed for this object. Okay, as mentioned before, you need your first object, which is the Sculpt Layers head, must be named object 0. Ensure that this is correct. Okay, in this instance it is correct. Now with this mesh selected, we can run a script to turn off all of the animated meshes, turn on each animated mesh one by one, and then thereafter export each. Okay, I have created a script for you which is called take and export morph targets. Okay, alright, once you select the script, this will ask you for a location in which to export all of the animated meshes to. I have created another subfolder in my extract folder which is called final, which is where I'm going to export all of the animated meshes to. Okay, select OK, and this will begin exporting each of the animated meshes for you. The process will take close to a minute or so to run, so let it run without doing anything to 3D Studio Max. Once the script has finished running, you will notice that the modded head which you created is displayed in the viewport. In this case, Scott Steiner's head is being displayed. If it is not displayed, then you have done something wrong when you exported the files from Mudbox to 3D Studio Max. In most instances, your object 0 is not named object 0. So ensure that this is correct. If everything is correct, you can now go into X-Ray and import all of the animated meshes which we have just exported. Alright, so I'm going to go into X-Ray. I'm going to use the Control A option, which is to open all of the animated meshes in our Scott Steiner mod. Alright, if we open up some of the animated meshes now, we'll notice that nothing has been imported. So all of the meshes are still static. All of them have no expressions. So now I'm going to click the Inject All Animations button. Once I click this button, I'm asked to browse to a directory in which the animated meshes are stored. I'm going to select the final folder which I created when exporting the files from 3D Studio Max, and I'm going to click OK. Alright, once our animations have been injected into the model, you can now go and check the animations again, and you'll find that the model now has all of the animations imported, like so. Alright, so now we've imported all of the animations for object 0, which is 112 animations in total. Now if we open the model using the Control N option, if you browse to the end of the grid, you'll notice that object 0 has a vertex header count of 113, meaning that this has animated meshes. Now you'll find that there are also other objects on the face, like object 16, and some of the other facial objects like the teeth and mouth, etc., which also have animated meshes. So if you want to do this, if you want to import the animated meshes from your base model into this model, you can do so using the same process. You would need to open the Y object file in an atomizer and move the object that you want to apply animations to up to position 0 in your model. So for instance, if I wanted to import the animations for object 16, I would open this file in an atomizer and then move object 16 up to object 0. Then I would open up the Y object file for the base model, which is DDP's model in this instance, and also move object 16 up to object 0. And then thereafter I'd follow the same process which I've entailed in this tutorial to import the animated meshes for object 16. It's not always necessary to do so for all of the facial objects. It depends on the mod that you're creating. Sometimes you'll find that with the eye objects like object 16, there are gaps in the model when the model blinks. So you may want to do the imports for object 16 in this instance. Sometimes you'll find that when the mouth opens, the inside of the mouth doesn't seem to align correctly with the animation. So in this instance, you'll want to import the animated meshes for the mouth area. But it all depends on the mod that you're creating. I'd say 90% of the time you only need to import the animated meshes for object 0. So it is up to you to decide how to proceed. Alright, once you are done with importing the animated meshes into your model, you can inject this back into your pack file and then thereafter copy this to your game directory, and your model will now have all of the animations applied to it in game. Alright, so that is the end of the tutorial. I know it is a fairly complex tutorial and there's a lot to understand. However, it is a fairly advanced tutorial, and if you're not certain about how some of the stuff works in X-Ray or some of the concepts I've described, please go through some of the tutorials I've created prior to this tutorial to get an understanding of these, and go through this tutorial for a few times so that you get an understanding of all the concepts I've described. I hope this tutorial was helpful to you, and that it'll help you in creating more realistic looking mods for your game. And that's it from me. So happy modding and see you soon.